Greetings and welcome back. I'm Michael Cooke, a composer from the San Francisco Bay Area. I want to dig into a notation technique that I use a lot in my own music, aleatoric box notation, and how I've been implementing it in Dorico 6 as part of my ongoing move from Finale. The specific piece I'm working on here is Music for Humans, which also happens to be where the name of this channel comes from. It's a large-scale orchestral work that mixes mixed meter writing with more fluid aleatoric textures, so it's a good case study for how and why I use box notation. Personally, I tend to use box notation when I want to combine aleatoric textures with fixed meter music. It lets me build complex, dense musical surfaces without filling the page with unplayable rhythmic clutter. It encourages performer agency and often produces a more organic ensemble sound than strictly synchronized notation ever could. It actually simplifies the notation and allows for easier performance when you're trying to create these types of sounds. At its core, aleatoric box notation is a way of deliberately loosening control. You can give up rhythm and notes and timing and tempo, all while preserving musical intent. It lives somewhere between strict determinism and open chaos. And for me, it's often the way forward when traditional notations start to feel like a bottleneck rather than a solution. Dorico 6 finally lets me get close to the workflow I developed years ago in Finale, including the ability of generating reasonable playback facsimiles of the aleatoric material. That playback isn't meant to be prescriptive. It's extremely useful, though, for conductors and performers as a reference point. It still takes a bit more work than I'd ideally like, and some of the solutions are a bit indirect, but it's a solid enough now I can use it consistently and confidently in real scores. So I'm going to provide you with a library I made for this box notation, and I'm going to walk you through the techniques I'm using now and how they map to my older Finale workflow and what Dorico 6 currently does well and where it asks for a little patience. I decided to start trying some more difficult scores that used modern techniques that Dorico doesn't handle as well. One of those is my orchestra and choral piece called Music from Humans. It doesn't use a lot of box notation, but it uses box notation. So I thought it would be a good one to start with because it had some work to do, but not a ton to figure out. Though, unfortunately, this one has one of those weird problems I get when I import some MusicXML from Finale. And I've got a lot of weird blank missing stuff there. And when I get to here, everything just is gone from this point over. I got doubles and just all the notes, except for the singing bowl part, are basically missing. So I had to figure this out first. And I had to hunt down this. Now, I have experience with this already, so I kind of had a sense of what was going on. And figured it was probably around this page, and it was probably a triplet over the Barline issue again. So I went into Finale and made some edits and made a new XML file. Yeah, so then I tried this one and got a little closer, and I could see that this is definitely the area where it broke here. So I tried again. Okay, and then I finally found it was this tie that was making it go bad. And then I got all my notes back and everything was ready to start. Now, I had some issues here where I lost some of the music, but all in all, most everything was in place. So I just decided to work from this. There are several tasks I did to get the piece ready. One is something I've shown before, so I won't exactly go over it, but essentially I needed to split the parts up into individual players because that's the Dorico method. So I have to clean up sections like this by splitting out the second flute part and the first flute part. And of course, there's several of these. Now, another thing is that this particular piece uses a very specific font. It uses an international phonetic alphabet font because it doesn't use words per se. It uses a Chinese phonetic alphabet known as Bapamafa. And in order to help with the pronunciation of that, I wrote all those alphabet characters out in phonetic alphabet. So those don't quite come off correctly from the import. So I had to figure out how to get those fixed. So it turned out to be super easy. I just went into paragraph styles. And then I found lyrics. And then I just needed to change the font. And I went in here and I found the IPA font. And then I needed to set its style to Roman. Okay, that's already there. So it's pretty much ready to go. I hit enter and bam, it worked perfectly. All my special IPA fonts just showed up. That was a wonderful, super quick fix. I didn't have to go in and redo anything. Love it. The other cases, too, that I did that was new is I have a harp part here. And I had originally spelled out all the harp pieces by hand in Finale, just with some text. Well, Dorico has some really good features in here, and one of them is to calculate pedals. So I can sort of set that up. And there's a pedal design, and then I just have to display them by going to the library and going into layouts, players, and then scrolling down to harp pedal. And then I can turn them on. So I think by default, I think I want generally note names. Cool. And then, so this case, particular case, I actually do want I want the periods to be a diagram. All right, so that sort of gets like, and then you can see down here if you need help adjusting it. And then you can go through, and every time you add a little change, and then I have a note that it goes to B natural, and I can click there. I can look down here and see that it's now set to B natural. I can move on to the next change, so back to a B flat. This is the only place where I got a little confused with an enharmonic spelling, but I was able to just set it up the way I wanted. And it worked pretty well. And so that was a really good win. That's another place where I chose to display it as a graphic instead of just the note change. But that was a good win. And it was really easy to set up, and it looks a lot better than what I had in Finale. So very excited about that. Now, I had to do percussion changes as well, again, to split the percussion out. That's much like what I had to do for these, so I'm going to cover that again. But at this point, I was ready to try and tackle the box notation. So let me show you the workflow I'm trying to replace. How things worked in Finale that I used to use is I could create notes here that would play back, even though this was the box and the only part that I was going to give to the performers. So that I could select these two measures and go in and select a staff style. So just to explain, I have this particular staff style for one line, and then in this, I can hide things. So I can say blank notation, and I can hide the rest and various things, just as an example. And then I can apply that staff style, and bam, I instantly got the line, but it will still play back. So I can still get a playback of what would happen. Now, again, all these lines are real thin. I have some different ones, but this is a really old piece I just launched quickly as an example of how it works. But that's super quick. Plus, it plays back. So now I can generate box notation. Again, I could just put a thicker line here and all the other kind of things that I would like. It'll still play back. So that is kind of the workflow I'm trying to recreate. For this next section of the video, I'm providing a link to a library I created so that you can do everything that I'm showing you. Just follow this URL and download the file. So with the library that you just installed, one line staff in it and the box notation lines so that you could do this yourself, this library. One of the first things I knew I needed to do was create secondary instruments for the one-line instruments or the box notation. So here I went into all the players I needed in. This shows up because of the additional library. And so you can just add the one-line instruments. Yeah, all the choir players and all the strings. All right, and then the strings. So now when I go in the rate mode and go to gallery mode, I can see these other parts. All right, since I lost all the notes for the string players, and again, also these showed up as pits, but they should have been different. So we went in and found strings and what they should have been collegio batto. And I replaced all the pits with what they should have been. Not sure how that didn't translate, but it didn't. Okay, then, like I said, I lost all these other notes for whatever reason on the import, but everything else was good. So I just pulled out what I had for the string players in that section. I think I had to make a couple of fixes in these so they wouldn't disappear, but I did. And then I grabbed all the notes from this one and copied it and moved over here and then put them in the new measure here. So start it there, and there we go. And that got everything back. Now, I did also clear out any weird legacy stuff and seeing how that blew everything away. And then what it turns out to be, if I click on this note and I bring this up, it seems to end the voice. So if I turn that off, then I get all the rests. Not sure exactly why that happens when you import, but that's essentially what happened. All right, so now I can do that with all the others. Well,
All right. And so now when I get back to page view, it works. I got everything basically what I wanted, like the way I had it. One of the things I learned too is I need this symbol here as well because it's a different instrument. And if I don't have it there, then I don't get the playback the way I want it. I do this so that I get playback that sort of represents what it should be. And I have to go, in order to do that, I have to go in play here and just make sure your instruments are set. So here I'm using a woodblock sound for the clicks and clacks of the vocalist. And then again, you make sure your strings are set to the appropriate strings. So, okay, one other issue that you get with this technique is, you have your names here, but then when the new instruments come in, that all gets messed up. It goes off to the single line names here. And so what you do to fix that is you go into layout options as Dave's and systems. And then you just tell it, I want to just use the player name instead of the instrument name. So when you do that, then you get these back. Now you have to kind of then switch into engrave mode and get these sort of all put back together and fix that. But now it looks proper. Not a big deal. And it cleans it up just fine. So now we are ready to start creating boxes. We have the note heads hidden because I didn't want to actually show real note heads here. It's supposed to be just the illusion of what you play because it's just random notes playing rhythm. You get to choose, but I kind of wanted to show shapes. So I created the box, and I've got a little library that you can drop in so that you can use it. And what I want to do here is I want to link it, this one there, attached to the rhythm session, but I want the end to be the end of the measure. So I'll add that. So I'll add the top. And that should have went all the way here. And then I will add the bottom. Maybe I have to do the whole measure. Yeah, so it knows what I'm talking about. And then the bottom here. Stitch there. And that sort of gets me the box. Now, one thing I did that I like is I took this title in there that I had that got imported, and I'm just going to clear that out. Then on this line, I'm going to add text that will replace it. Okay, and there, that fits right in there. So that gets me a pretty good looking box. Now after, we switch to the other instrument here for the single line, this is so that just random notes that I played in at one point in time, I want these hidden, but I still want the notes there so I get a playback. So what I found I have to do for Dorico to make this first is I have to select all the notes. Okay, then I have to go to engrave mode. And I have to go in and scroll to the note section. Where is it? Okay, so then I hide the notes, hide the stems, and hide the ledger lines. Okay, so that gets me pretty close. And then the other thing is to hide all accidentals. So if I get away, hey, everything's gone but these guys. So then I got to bring these in, and what I found I can do is change their color to 0 opacity, and then they're gone. So I have to do that for every note and every measure. Takes a while, but I've done that up here for this guy here. So yeah, and I'm gonna quickly put the box in here just so we have that look again. I gotta switch to right mode. There, yeah, that time it worked right. And then I gotta reselect, and then bottom. Okay, and get rid of this, and put text in. Okay, it all looks good. Then I'm gonna go to, from right mode, I'm gonna get into gallery. And then you can see, in the gallery, it shows the different instruments. So here, I'm going to go through all the way to the end, get all that highlighted. And then here, I'm going to switch this to start at the 2 stabs, and I'm going to add a line. So this is my long line that I built. And I'll do it in this mode, so it's real easy to set up. And then if I switch back to page view, it looks pretty close. I just going to extend it here because that's my personal preference. One other note I should have mentioned earlier. So one important thing when you go to hide all these things is make sure you're in global mode. Because if you're not in global mode, then when you go to the part, this will not be hidden. So I made that mistake earlier. And so if I go to violin, you'll see I still have some of the displays because I didn't do it globally. And so I have to go in and change it. So I'd have to go in and change this to hide, and again, these also, the triplets, have to be hidden. You can hide. So there's a couple ways you can deal with the triplets, but again, so it's brackets and number, and you can hide them when you go back to all of these guys and do the little color trick. I mean, I wish there was just one way of doing this, but like I say, if I say try and do the color trick on the accidentals, I think that one doesn't work. Yeah, see, they're still visible. So I have to go in and turn them off. And then you see that I still have all the ledger lines because I made that mistake. And so I have to clear all the rest in order to get those options, and then switch to engrave mode. Oh, I got to get the triplet off and the text off. All right, so now all my options show back up, and I can hide the ledger lines. Okay, so again, you want to make sure you don't do that mistake that I did, and make sure when you are changing things, you do it at the other. Well, this is another thing. You get this guy, which is a change of the instrument. So with this one, I usually hide this by going to custom scale and setting it to 1 because you can't set it to 0. And that's the only way to get rid of that one. You end up with a tiny little mark there when it prints, but it's the best you can do. Let's see, this guy should also be hidden, I think. I think this one works. Yeah. So just make sure in the global mode that when you go to full score, that way. Yeah. So most of the times that works, but you can get a really good looking box and line this way. Now, like I say, I went in and adjusted this length a little bit because I wanted it all the way touching. And that's not a big deal. Now, the only other issue I ran into is you see how my staves are floated? And I never came up with a solution for this. So I fixed it in post in graphics editor and took the PDF and just moved it down.
Future self here. One thing I left out was that the library doesn't have any clefs. So if you just use the library as is and don't add clefs, you won't have this issue.
If somebody's got a fix and knows how to get these guys adjusted without causing issues, I'll show you the blog post. I asked Steinberg about how to fix this, and you can see that thread. And a gentleman tried to help me for quite a while there, but none of the solutions really ever worked. And I got tired of experimenting and said it was going to just be a lot faster for me to just fix it graphically in an editor that I can adjust the PDF. And that's what I did to get the finished look. But I'm basically pretty happy with this. The box notation here is 100 times better than anything I had in Finale, because there it would look right in the score and would look bad at the part. And it was just kind of a mess, and I'd always have to make multiple versions of the score to keep that going. You know, but here it looks fantastic everywhere I go. But I will say I would like to have these bar lines here extended the full length, which is something I could do in Finale, and I've yet to figure that out because I think that helps for people to count measures. The fact that I showed you how easy this is to do in Finale instead of having to go through and manually shut everything off of like 3 or 4 different times in 3 or 4 different ways to get everything hidden. Don't have any of that problems with Finale with staff styles. So, you know, there's a crap load of room to improve, but I could finally get this score done and looking mostly right. And then after I edit it inside of a graphics program, I use Affinity programs to edit it. You know, it looks great, but it is so much more difficult to do in Dorico than Finale because they don't have staff styles. Here we have the final look inside of Dorico, and here's some playback with the box notation. Here's the original Finale score. This is the new Dorico score.